just now, my name is Emil. I'm a designer and a member of BK team. Today we're here with Jen Herzig Smith. Jen is an independent artist and a designer with over 30 years of experience in graphic design, mixed media, painting, installation, printmaking, and bookmaking. I had the pleasure of working with Jen on our recent collaboration, so the BK and Jen Herzig Smith items that we created together. So today we're going to be talking about that series featured in this collaboration, which explores the character and beauty of like homemade inks from found materials. So thank you so much for being here today to talk about that. Let's go ahead. I got some questions set up for you, so we can kind of jump off of that. And yeah, so just to kind of start out, how long have you been making your own inks?
Well, I started making them about 7 years ago.
Okay, that's a
so
lot.
yeah. So can I just say one thing though?
Yes.
I'd like to acknowledge, can I do an acknowledgement?
Sure.
With the Gabrielino Tongva, I just want to acknowledge that we're on their land. I just wanted to make sure that was in there.
Yeah.
But it's been 7 years since I started making the inks, and I started with natural dyeing, and then it went into the natural ink.
Like spiraled down.
So working with fibers and cloth and things like that, and then going into paper.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. I feel like this is not an answer that you'll be able to give any kind of exact number for, but if you had to like estimate like how many batches of inks you've made, what would that number look like?
Well, I know it's been at least 100. So at least 100. Yeah, at least 100. And that goes from some that worked and then some that didn't really work. And what I mean by that is that sometimes I would leave the pot and it might burn or something, or it didn't do exactly what I thought it was going to do, or something happened. Yeah. But I'd say about 100. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Somewhere around there.
That is a lot. So what sparked your curiosity to start exploring that? Like, especially I feel like, even within making inks, like using found materials, especially materials like, that you use from like your own yard, is pretty unusual. So like what made you decide like this is something I want to explore?
Well, it started when I did, like I said, I was doing the natural dyeing. I took a class by Allison Alford at the Armory here in Pasadena. And I actually was invited by a friend. I didn't go there. She just asked me and I said yes. And I said, oh, that sounds really interesting. And so she's also an artist. And so we went there. And while Allison was talking about the process, she made just a quick sentence about, oh, and you can make ink this way. And then she just moved on into the natural dyeing. And I just went, what? Wait, what? And so then from that sparked my curiosity and my excitement. I was like, oh, and so I asked her a little bit more. I said, on paper, have you done that? And I just asked her a little bit, and then I finished out the class and took another class with her anyway. And then I started exploring that on paper, and then looking into people that were making natural ink. And Jason Logan is an artist in Canada who he makes ink, and he actually wrote a book called Make Ink. And so I got that book, and while I was experimenting and things, I was just trying to find anybody else that was, and there's also a woman named Heidi Gustafson who is also an artist that has done work with natural inks and pigments and things. Anyway, but Jason, his book really inspired me because he said you can make ink with pretty much anything, and it's true. Anything makes color.
Right.
So even the slightest, the lightest amount of pigment or things that you may not think will have color, they actually do. So his approach I found really interesting, and so I worked with a few of the recipes that he had in his book, and then. And so while I was doing that, I was also just exploring my own things and along with it. Yeah. So
that's really cool.
Yeah. So it was a combination of people and and just the interest. But it was really when Ellison said that about the ink, I was like,
Just like the
What?
one sentence that just kind of,
Yeah,
yeah,
I had no idea. So that was very
yeah.
cool.
That is really cool.
Yeah.
So like how, so you were saying, you can make inks with anything, but how do you, as a creator, as an
Hmm.
artist that's selecting the materials, how do you choose which materials you want to use?
Right. Well, I started out, like I said, doing the ink with recipes and things. And there's all kinds of ways that you can shift the color and the pH. It's organic chemistry,
Mm.
really. So working with salts and, ash is a big shifter of color.
Mhm.
And so I was working with that. And then I spoke with a teacher at the school that my kids were going to,
Mhm.
and she taught handwork. And so she is somebody that dyes a lot of fabric and yarn and things like that. And she kept saying, oh, this yellow color, because yellow is a very common color that you can get from many plants,
Mm.
especially here in California. And so she said, oh, I just want something other than this color yellow. So I started thinking about it, and I thought, what if we don't try to control the color? Because
Mhm.
I was trying to do the recipes and just do it exactly and see what I could get that way. And for me, it seemed interesting to sort of let that go and I guess it's a different boundary or parameter for the artwork, and put
Mhm.
that on myself and go, what if I didn't try to shift the color? What if I just let the plants do what they do with just heat and time, and
Mhm.
maybe sometimes not heat, because you can work with solar and you can also work with
Yeah.
induction heating and things like
Especially
that.
since it's so warm here.
Yeah,
So
since
yeah.
it's so warm and we have all the sun for a
Mhm.
lot of the time, there's a lot of solar ink making. But for me, that seemed really interesting to me. And what I found is that um, many plants, so as far as selecting a plant, I work with native plants, California native plants,
Mhm.
but I do that very respectfully
Mhm.
because they're the native plants here, and so that brings in a whole other kind of relationship and level of relationships. So those I'm pretty selective about the plants that are used in ink making.
Mhm.
And then I've also used what people might call weeds, that are also
Like
think
unwanted things.
yeah,
Yeah.
but I don't consider them unwanted.
Mhm.
I think all plants are wanted.
Right.
And so but the other way is that I am learning, and I have learned throughout the process, which plants tend to give a little more and which don't. And that's part of the process, right? So when you're
Mhm.
asking about selecting the plants, it's there's all these different variables, right?
Mhm.
But I try not to use the California native plants. I use them very, not sparingly, but selectively,
Mhm.
and I grow them in my garden.
Mhm.
So I don't go out and gather a
Mhm.
lot, although that's okay. I'm
Mhm.
not opposed to that.
Right.
But I have started my garden where it's focused on an ink garden, or
Mhm.
the plants that I think. So there's the tried and true
Mhm.
colors, like things like pomegranate. And I happen to have a pomegranate tree before I started making ink.
Mhm.
So that's the other thing,
Mhm.
is that I realized that I already had a lot of these things growing in
Oh,
the
okay.
garden.
Yeah.
And then trying all the things that don't. So that's also another thing, is that those are the things that I do think about when I'm planting in regards to ink.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Before we started the project, like you were kind enough to invite me to your
Hmm.
space and your garden. I really loved how overgrown it was. Like in the same way that you are saying, like you were trying not to um, control the color. It feels like you're trying not to control your garden, and that
Yeah.
was like really beautiful to see. You said something interesting just now, where you said you use the plants very respectfully.
Hmm.
So what does that mean to you? Like, what is respecting like the native plants, or respecting like the land? Like, what does that mean to you?
So it's a relationship that I'm always working on. And since I live, and a lot of us live in this very urban environment, um, that that it's a combination of the balance in bringing nature in and where it is and where it's not sure if that's really, but it's more the relationship. So once I started to really work with the native plants, I started realizing that there's this relationship, right, that we have. And me coming from settler background, that there is respect and a reciprocity. And I started taking classes with Native Americans and realizing that because it was a complicated relationship, because I felt like I couldn't really use those to do ink making or dyeing, even though it's in my history, right? It's in my family, and it's all around the world. There was something that I just felt, I guess I'm very sensitive to that feeling of not wanting to overstep or take something. And I don't know, I just felt like there was something about that, right? And that relationship. So I'm actively working on that relationship and how I fit into that, and the native plants are part of that too. And the overgrown garden, I do tend my garden, and I do. But there are things like nettle, and which is a very it loves to grow and it loves to go into places and to take up a lot of space. And so when you were there, the nettle and mugwort is also another plant that really loves to. The California mugwort really likes to take up space. So I definitely plant those in there. Anyway.
Yeah, that was really cool. For y'all who are here, when we went to the garden, like you did point out the nettle, and you were also pointing out like, oh, don't touch these ones because you might get like a reaction or things like that. And then we went back to your house, and then you made us like nettle tea from your garden, and I was like, this is so like appropriate for the experience, like talking about the dyes, and then we're actually like drinking the plant material that you were using. So I really appreciated that experience. It was like really fun to explore that with you. So I guess like you're thinking about the when you are thinking about working with the inks, when you are thinking about like I guess like once you have like gathered the materials and you're actually like distilling it or painting with it, like what is going through your head? Because I feel like there's so many different kinds of like pieces and ideas, and I know that you have talked about like not trying to control like what the outcome is as much, but like what inside of your head does that look like?
You're right. I'm thinking about the things of the actual ink itself, right? The actual material that I'm working with. And so in regards to viscosity and depth and fluidity and all of those things, working with water and the plants together. So and there's so during that process, there's a couple of different ways where I use heat. So I boil it. It's a natural dye process, right? So I boil it, and sometimes it's not a full boil. Sometimes, so I'm thinking about those technical things while I'm making, and I do consider it all the art in the making, because I do make my material. So those are the things that I'm thinking about, and also, but even before that, when I'm going and gathering the plants from the garden. Like I said, I'm thinking about the relationship, and there's a lot of time to think about these things and really get to know the plants and really get to know and think about the tending of the garden, right? And they want to grow and keep them growing, and know that what I'm doing is important to what they're doing and that relationship. So that's how it starts, right? And so it starts with this very kind of intimate working with the plants. And so when I trim them and I gather from the garden, I'm thinking about that as I'm doing that. And then when I go to use it, whether I have to process them to get them ready or if I just put them into the dye pot, I'm also thinking about the how it breaks down to like, and I'm noticing that there's the particles, and like I said, it's organic chemistry, right? So that is an art. I feel like it is, knowing when to stop and when to start. And I think as artists we have that, right? When you go to the canvas, you're sitting there, when do I stop, when do I, when is it finished, right? And that's I'm kind of jumping ahead to the, working with it. But as far as the ink pot, I am thinking about those kinds of things. And sometimes I just, often let it go and then just see what happens, and then put it on the paper. And then if I need to work with the material a little bit more, then I do that. So it's a sort of back and forth, right? But it's changed me a lot in the way that, like I said, that relation. I keep going back to the relationship with the plants, because, right, it's like it's once you're working in that way, it's good for the soul, right? So it feels good. So even though I'm thinking about the technical, it's so much of it is feeling that warmth, and looking for that kind of feeling, right, with it. So there, it starts with that relationship, and then that, I feel like that just carries through to it. And because I'm not using it in a fountain pen or something like that, which I love my fountain pen, and I get my inks here, right? And so I get my inks here for fountain pens, but what I really love about the ink that I'm working with is that all the particles and all of the parts that come in it, right? And so I'm thinking a lot about that too, but and the physicality of it and all that. So there's a lot of thinking, but there's also all those other parts. Like, what I really love about it is the physicality of getting out and being in the garden, and then that carries through the process. So
that's really cool.
Yeah.
And I know that, you were saying, like, you keep using the word relationship, but I feel like that is a really good way of describing, like, your process, from what I understand. You have your sketchbook here, and each of the pages, like, some of them have notes, some of them don't, but the ones that do have notes might be, like, about a specific plant material, and, like, what you can do differently, or, like, how this did behave differently. The amount of, I guess, like, the logical, like, almost like scientific approach, like, really mixes with, like, the creative part of it. And I really enjoyed that about your sketchbook. Actually, do we want to show, like, a couple pages?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can pull this.
Yeah.
Do you want me to go through a little bit of it?
So I'll just, like, show a couple. So this is kind of like what I mean, where there are, like, different kinds of, and you can, like, interject or stop, like, my page. There are different kinds of, like, dipped ink. So these are kind of like the pieces that are actually used in our collaboration. But I love these notes here, and how you use, like, different ones. And to me, that makes sense as, like, you using the word relationships, because it's like you are getting to know very intimately, like, each of the individual materials. So,
and the color. And that's such an important part as an artist, right? Is like, and that's part of the whole thing with starting and not shifting anything, is seeing what will happen if I don't do that. Now, I am controlling things like heat and, fermenting. I'll do fermenting, which is a much longer process, which I really love too. But it's also the discovery of that, right? And, or more the excitement, not the discovery, but the excitement of it, that, that it's like when you pull, we were just talking about in a dark room where you pull, see the image appear. And I have a printmaking background, so pulling that paper off of the press and seeing that appear, like, you're still doing a lot, right, before you get to that place, but there's this excitement that happens, and there's this excitement that happens with this too, and that I don't know. And there are colors that, sure, I can, walnut ink is a very, black walnut ink is a very tried and true ink, and that I can sort of tell. But you'll see a lot of the pieces have unknown ink on them, because I try to document the process, and this does document, and there's stories in here and everything, but I don't do that with everything.
Right.
And now that we've done this show, I'm thinking, oh, maybe I should think about that. But it's but there is a lot in here that this is where I usually document things, right?
Mhm.
And but also it tells a story. And some of these inks, like my friend Anna, who's here, she has a beautiful garden too.
Mhm.
And so I've worked with Fig from her garden. It's like the fig tree, and so
Mhm.
she's given me branches. So there's a different kind of gathering happening in this
Mm.
urban space,
Right.
right? And it's again, it's friendships, and so those stories go in here. In fact, I think there's one of those might have it
Yeah.
on there too.
Yeah, I think one
So
of these
Anna's
ones does
song is
have,
the Anna
yeah.
song that's on the,
Yeah.
on the
So there's like a fig one that gets some
it's
imagery.
usually the one on the um, so but yeah, because there's just stories behind it, and I like layers, you know, I like the depth of it and going into the deepness that happens when you are working with something that you've had that much of a relationship with,
Mhm.
right? And I do say relationship a lot. I'm going to say beauty. Can I add beauty
You
to
can
that
say whatever
too?
you want.
Beauty
Yeah.
and relationship. Like beauty is
Mhm.
really, really big
Mhm.
in that I believe in beauty. I believe in and what that means, but it also I'm transforming from this work, right? Because it's broadening my definition of beauty or what I see and connecting and understanding when something I feel is beautiful and it's not. And the plants and the ink are showing me that,
Mhm.
right? So anyway, we were talking about the this, and so these are just these are um, samples of the work, the continuous stuff that I've done, the dipping, the painting, the and there is when you do natural dyes, you have your natural dye notebook,
Mhm.
which has the swatches in
Mhm.
it,
It's kind of
and
like a
so
fabric notebook,
yeah,
right?
and you
Yeah.
document. And I'm actually not very good at documenting. That's why the unknown of a lot of things, and so that's not really my total focus, right? But that's why you'll see things like the stories. I think are the things that are important. So even though it is a kind of documentation,
Mhm.
it's definitely more about the things you're pointing out, like the stories and the names and the friendships and all of those things.
Yeah.
So yeah,
That's really
yeah,
awesome.
and the paper. The paper is
Yeah.
really important too.
Yeah.
But again, I'm not very good at documenting. So even though I could probably pick out a lot of this paper and tell you what it is, um, it's um, it's uh, it's just there with the ink. You know what I mean? It's just part of that.
Mhm.
I don't know, and it shifts and changes depending on the ink and how it reacts with the paper and what's in the paper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that that's like really beautiful in its own way, though. Like, even though there are parts of it that you haven't documented, I feel like there's like evidence in that of like how present you were with
Mm-hmm.
the process itself. Like, you didn't write down the paper because you already know what the paper
Mm-hmm.
is. You didn't write down the inks because like you are already thinking about what the ink is. So even though it's not here for me to see, it's like I can tell that that like your concentration, I guess, like shows through in that to me.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking too about how you've changed in
Mm-hmm.
doing this. I wanted to ask you my next question. What has your art taught you?
Right. Um, that it's important,
Mhm.
that art is really important and necessary. And and I think that also it crosses over into all parts of my life, you know. This so my approach in this way, this sort of letting go. I do have a design background, and
Mhm.
I was trained as a graphic designer, and so there's this constant controlling of things and making things straight. And
Mhm.
if you've done this work, we all know, right? Like that. It's putting it exactly for presentation on whatever, and so that I struggle with that because I'm trained in that. I'm also prone to that too. So I really so this work and this art, this way of art is constantly changing me and telling me that it's important and necessary and in my life, and you know, and putting it out there, like so that other people can see it. I guess that's another thing that because you know, a lot of times I just want to close the door, and just like not talk to anybody about any of
Right.
it, and just keep it, you know, close. But I think that's the other thing. So it's kind of learning through the art that it's important, and it's important for me, and healing for me, and changing for me in really good ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the beauty, like I talked about,
Right.
and that things in our world, beauty is really important. And sometimes I don't know if that's expressed enough, maybe. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
not talking about just pretty. I'm talking about like really, truly beautiful. You know, you look at something like this and you're like, well, is that beautiful or not? You
Mm-hmm.
know, and what is the beauty in that? And it starts to uh, just change. Like there's other things that I'm doing in my life that I approach now in this way of kind of stepping back and trying, you know, working really hard not to control things too much, and let things happen. And that's a lot of that is from my relationship with the art and the plants and all of the things that I do.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah.
Despite you wanting to close the door, I do appreciate you sharing with us today. Like, it's very like beautiful to look at, and
Thank you.
I think like the intimate nature like makes it that much more special.
Yeah.
You know, I like seeing like this kind of presented in front of people, because you were talking about beauty, and you know, beauty is subjective. But when you know, art like, or fine art, especially like, you know, abstract art, I feel like is put in front of somebody, someone is saying like, I think that this is beautiful, and
Mm-hmm.
it kind of like invites you to look a little bit closer on like what other people are perceiving as beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So I really love that about this, where you know, I don't know, I guess especially because these like loose marks that you make, they're the kind of marks that you might make in the corner of a paper and then just like throw away and not think
Right.
about, right? But because it's made with this ink, because it's reacting to the paper, it's just that much more interesting to look at. Like what happens when you are, you know, your natural line is collaborating with something that is from the earth, and like
Mm-hmm.
that's really beautiful to look at. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
I really love that.
Yeah. Thank you. I with beauty is, I don't know what the other word is, the opposite. You know, the sort of, with beauty comes also the things that aren't so beautiful. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's also part of the equation too, or the conversation, is that we're looking at beauty, but then there's all these other things, and it can't really exist without the other
Mm-hmm.
things, right? So that's part of it too.
Yeah.
But because it has this living matter in it, it does bleeds a little differently. And I am it's jumping ahead a little bit, but like I am starting to work with other things with this
Mm-hmm.
period is just the natural inks, and that's another whole kind of thing I had to leap over, is,
Mm-hmm.
you know, oh, is this going to be all that I do, you know, for the rest of my life as an artist? I have to put myself into this box, and like, this is all I do. I have to say, oh, I'm just a only natural ink, organic, you know, plant color person in this way, without shifting the color, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I've discovered is that it's going exactly the way it needs to go,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is that by putting those parameters on the work and the process and all the things, that that is, I've learned so much about how the ink lays on the paper, and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have to think so much, because color can be really difficult, right? We know, like
Yeah.
you work with color all the
Yes.
time, and so it can be very difficult. And I've worked with a lot of color palettes and things like that in my design career, but so it's I'm feeling like, oh, this is exactly what I needed to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
I needed to go to this really sort of basic place, even though it has all these layers to it, and to really learn about what I'm doing, and what the ink is doing, what's happening with it, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
that's part of the process. Yeah.
Yeah. Any
So
any one piece is the result of many, many failures.
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
it makes sense to me. You have to like make those mistakes in order to find out like what is working for you.
Yeah, and then you go back to beauty
Yeah.
because like because I could have just put this aside and said, "Oh, this is just my beginning with it," right? And I don't know if I can't remember in the scheme of things like where this sits within the time of all of it, right? It's
Within
kind
your
of
100,
it's more, it's not like a line, really. It's more like a circle. But but I do think it's just as important. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think you probably said something like that, but it's just as important to have those things out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah. So what is next for you? You're saying like, am I gonna do like natural inks for the rest of my life? So
Yeah.
what is the next thing you're doing?
Well, I have been talking with some artists in Wales. They're good friends of mine, but we do Zoom calls every week. Actually, we've been doing that since 2021, it's going on like almost 5 years. And we're talking about collaborating, and we've already done some collaboration together. Here we showed some work here. That we did some self-portraits, and so that was some work that we showed here, and then I showed my stuff in Wales. So anyway, we are talking about collaborating, and there's a thread that kind of weaves itself into all of our work, and talking about where we are and the place that we're at, and these places that we're at, even though they're so across the water, and but we're all working with where we are, and so I look forward to collaborating with them on some work, and also like I said, working in other materials too, and shifting the color and all of those things that even though I sort of threw that out to start with, I want to do more color and start working with that now that I have done this and continue to work this way too. But yeah, the collaborations, I think I'm really looking forward to that because and like this, this is really important to me. So I think that yeah, we're talking about doing that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see that.
I
That'll
know.
be really cool to see, especially since like your work so far is like so connected to California and like the local native like plants. Seeing how working with people who are across the world, like how that changes and how that influences will be like a really interesting process.
Yeah, and we're trying to figure out. It gets a little complicated because sending work back and forth gets really expensive, and also we're not quite sure if it's going to get there or not, things like that. But so we're trying to figure out ways that we can do this together, and have it be I don't know, just show our work in the best way that we can, right? And so yeah, we did a show called Terrain, which is it's a biannual show, and it was started in Chicago and by an artist there, and so you put your work outside, you find someone's home and you put your work outside so that everyone can see it, right? And I really love projects like that because I really love giving as many, giving access to it like that, right? And so that's something that we did last year, and we'll probably do, a couple of years ago, and we'll probably do that again. So yeah.
Well,
so we're finding ways.
Thank you so much for telling us about that. Like, in terms of access, like I feel very grateful that we're able to show your work today. So thank you for being here. Thank you for showing your work. So we're going to wrap up here, but today we are going to be featuring Jen Herzig Smith's work from 12 to 5 during our regular open hours. I encourage you to look very closely if you are able to look in person. It's really wonderful, and there's really a lot to encounter and discover within each of the pieces. You know, if you can't make it to the studio today, but you're interested in contacting Jen, then you can go ahead and you have a contact on your site, jenherzigsmith.com. So that's JenHerzigs and MITH.com. All right. And thank you so much for having this talk with us.
Thank you, Emil.
Yeah, this was super interesting. So, yeah, I had fun.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.